Well, it's getting close to that time, folks. The end of Halloween 2024 is rapidly approaching, which can only mean one thing, that the true horror is just around the corner. So, what better time to discuss one of my favorite horror films, an iconic movie from the 1980s that uses dark comedy and impressive special effects to offer a unique spin on a classic horror story that's been around for over 100 years. Do you like chasing people through subway tunnels?
Oh, yeah.
Shut it.
Well, then I've got a movie made just for you. Grab your backpacks and stay on the road, folks, as we take a spoiler-heavy look at An American Werewolf in London.
This says bushiest beaver.
An American Werewolf in London starts like any great movie in the countryside of northern England, and it's here that we meet Jack and David, two graduate students who are backpacking through Europe and who have been nice enough to wear different colored jackets so that you can tell them apart.
Jack. David.
After a long day of riding in a truck that's full of sheep, the two of them come to the small town of East Proctor and decide to take a rest at a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb, an establishment that's famous for its subtle signage and where the customers are incredibly British.
God save the Queen!
Not wanting to be the stereotypical American tourists, David and Jack decide to take a seat and have some tea when they notice something strange on the wall. A pentagram, which Jack recalls is the sign of the werewolf from the 1941 movie The Wolfman.
The pentagram, the sign of the wolf. It can break the evil spell.
Curious as to why they have a reference to an old black and white movie on their wall, Jack inquires about the pentagram, a question that the locals do not take kindly to.
Well, what's that star on the wall for?
You made me miss.
You son of a bitch!
Realizing that they've worn out their welcome, David and Jack decide to make a quick exit, but not before they get some advice from the townsfolk.
Go. Stay on the road.
Advice that they immediately ignore, which causes this to happen. Out of the night, a mysterious beast attacks them, killing Jack and knocking David to the ground. Luckily, however, the townspeople show up and shoot the animal before it can kill David. Now, why did they suddenly decide to show up and help? I don't know. Could all of this been prevented if they had just let Jack and David stay in the pub? Yes, it would have. I guess it just goes to prove that if you interrupt a British man's dart game, then you deserve to die.
Then murder it is.
We then cut to 3 weeks later, and David is recovering at a hospital in London, where we meet two nurses. There's Nurse Alex, the attractive, well-attentive nurse who's good at her job, and Nurse Susan, who seems to spend most of her time looking at the genitalia of her male patients.
Is it you?
What makes you say that?
I've had a look.
Which, according to the American Nurses Association, is considered misconduct. But it was the 80s, so what are you gonna do?
It was a different time.
Eventually, David does regain consciousness, and his condition starts to improve. Sadly, however, this is also when David finds out that Jack was killed from a representative of the American Embassy, who is played by Frank Oz, and who tells David this sad news in the most hilariously inappropriate way possible. But honestly, if you're going to get bad news, who better to get it from than the voice of Fozzie Bear?
Jack's dead.
Hi.
Waka waka!
Later that evening, police inspectors from Scotland Yard come by the hospital to explain to David the official story given to the police from the townspeople who helped him the night of the attack, telling him that it wasn't an animal that attacked him, but rather a local lunatic, a story that David denies. After all, most people when they attack someone don't leave bodies that look like this, which is something I would have absolutely no knowledge of at all, trust me. So now, David finds himself confined to the hospital while he's recovering. But luckily, he has Alex to pass the time with, and as the days go by, the two of them start to form a connection. And by form a connection, I mean David desperately throws himself at her again and again until she finally gives up. However, this is also when we see that David is starting to lose his grip on reality by having visions of Jack's dead body and having dreams of running through the woods and eating deer.
The meat has a delicious, smoky, rich flavor.
We then cut back to the United States, where David has been reunited with his family, and all seems to be going well as he's learning to put what happened in England behind him. And this is the part of the movie where we get to witness one of the greatest scenes ever captured on film. In a moment that comes absolutely out of nowhere, a group of machine gun wielding Nazi werewolves attack David and kill his entire family. And honestly, this part of the movie is so out of left field that it goes from being hilarious to shocking and then back to hilarious. It's an emotional roller coaster that will make you look at the person sitting next to you and say,
"Oh, shit."
But luckily for David, it was all just a dream.
Holy shit.
A few days later, David is finally released from the hospital, and Alex invites him to stay with her until he can return to his family in the States. So, naturally, being a good host, she decides to show him all the exciting things that London has to offer, like a local market, the subway, and her apartment.
The bathroom.
Lovely.
Anyway, enough of that. Let's have some sex. Later that night, David is unable to sleep, so he goes to the bathroom where he once again is confronted by Jack's dead body, who tells David that he has to kill himself before the next full moon or that he will do something terrible, a conversation that gets too loud and eventually wakes up Alex, who tells David to come back to bed, where he says this.
I just saw Jack again.
Something that Alex seems to not really care about for some reason, despite the fact that she's only known David for 3 weeks, and he's just confessed that he keeps having conversations with his dead best friend. Now, ladies, would this not be a red flag? Anyway, back to the sex. So now it's time for the B plot of the movie that literally no one cares about, where Dr. Hirsch goes to the town where David was attacked so that he can further investigate his claims that he was attacked by a wolf and not a man. Once he makes his way to the slaughtered lamb, he encounters the same cold shoulder as David and Jack did when they were there. So, not wanting to cause any trouble, he decides to leave. But after talking with one man who claims that David will harm other people, and realizing that the people of East Proctor actually believe the werewolf myth to be true, the doctor concludes that the survivor's guilt that David is facing will manifest itself through the subliminal belief that he will become a werewolf, which could cause him to be violent towards others. Now, despite the fact that I think the B plot kills the momentum of the movie, much like talking about it kills the momentum of my video, I will say that I appreciate what it does for the doctor as a character. He uses his education and medical background to come up with a very plausible thesis as to why David could be dangerous to other people. The fact that the script doesn't have him do a 180 from a man of science into a Dr. Loomis type character is a testament to the script and to John Landis as a writer. But enough of that, let's get back to the main story, where the next morning, Alex goes back to work, leaving David to spend the rest of the day alone in her apartment, where he spends hours trying to entertain himself by being hated by animals, taking naps, and looking for something to eat inside her incredibly small refrigerator.
I want that purple stuff.
Yeah, nothing interesting seems to be happening at all until...
Jesus Christ!
What? In a moment that's widely considered one of the greatest uses of practical effects in the history of movie making, we get to see David actually transform into a werewolf, all of which is made possible by the work of special effects legend Rick Baker, who I will talk more about later. This demonstration of incredible skill, as well as the sound of all of David's bones twisting and breaking as he transforms into the wolf, makes this scene incredible to watch, even after it's been 40 years since its release.
I have hunted werewolves. I shot one once.
So, the first night of terror begins, as the wolf searches the night looking for victims, the first of which are an engaged couple, Harry Berman and Judith Brown, who are going to a friend's house for dinner. Later that night, 3 homeless men are attacked, as well as a man named Gerald Bringsley, who is killed on the escalators of the London Underground. And let me just say, while I've never personally been to London, getting from the train platform to the street looks like a nightmare unto itself. How do you not get lost? And secondly, why are the ads on the subway so wild?
Wow, porn!
The next morning, David wakes up groggy and naked in the wolf pen at the London Zoo, a situation that is uncomfortable to say the least.
Thank you.
A naked American man stole my balloons.
What?
After an uncomfortable bus ride back to Alex's apartment, David explains to her that he doesn't remember any of the events of the previous night and that somehow he ended up naked and at the zoo. Information that Alex, once again, seems to dismiss. So, either this makes her the greatest girlfriend ever or the dumbest person alive. I'll let you decide.
Oh, yeah, she's pretty stupid. That's something we can all agree on, right?
Oh, major idiot.
A few moments later, Dr. Hirsch calls Alex and asks that she and David come to his office so they can talk about his condition. But on the way there, the cab driver begins to tell them about the killings that happened the night before, which causes David to realize that he really is a monster and he must be stopped. But despite his best efforts, he's unable to bring himself to take his own life. So instead, he decides to follow Jack's corpse into a local porno theater. And it's here that they decide to indulge in the most vile, disgusting, and debaucherous film that's ever been made.
You got a friend in me.
Come on, let's wrangle up the cattle.
Good movie.
As David and Jack enjoy the movie, Jack introduces David to his victims from the night before. And it's here that we learn that until the curse of the werewolf is broken and David is dead, his victims will remain in a state of limbo and unable to cross to the other side. Then his first victim, Judith Brown, describes what it was like to watch The Last Jedi for some reason.
Yes, you just put the gun to your forehead and pull the trigger.
So, as it turns out, having to literally battle your inner demons is really hard when you're surrounded by the sound of people who are jerking off. And despite his best efforts to resist, the power of the full moon takes hold of David again, causing him to once again be unleashed onto the city of London, which causes this guy to be eaten alive, this police inspector to have his head bitten off, and everyone else to fall victim to the lack of driver's ed in British schools. Now, I'll be honest, this part of the movie had me dying laughing because it reminded me of the climax of another John Landis movie where this happened. So, I guess John Landis thinks car crashes are funny, something that I tend to agree with.
My car is total, bro.
As the wolf continues its rampage, it becomes trapped down a one-way alley surrounded by police, who have their guns ready and are waiting for the order to shoot. However, Alex is convinced that she can reach David despite his condition, and she does so by confessing her true feelings.
I love you, David.
And then he's shot and killed. The end. And when it's all said and done, the movie we end up with is absolutely fantastic. It features a well-paced, tight script that doesn't overcomplicate its premise, top-notch acting, and some of the best makeup and creature effects that you'll ever see. Written and directed by John Landis, this movie is a masterclass in executing a simple story, and that execution all comes down to pacing. You see, films with a straightforward premise rely heavily on pacing, because without the crutch of a complex narrative, every scene has to serve a purpose, either building character or advancing the plot. This ensures that the story unfolds naturally and without unnecessary filler. An American Werewolf in London does this incredibly well. The premise is set up quickly and effectively, and every scene after the setup drives the story forward, making the film incredibly engaging. The only scene that slightly brings it down is when Dr. Hirsch visits the slaughtered lamb to learn more about the wolf attack. This scene doesn't really provide the audience with any new information, and what the doctor learns doesn't really impact the story at all. So it doesn't really feel like it serves a purpose. However, when you consider the fact that this movie is only an hour and 40 minutes with credits, it leads me to believe that this scene was only added so that the movie could reach a feature film length, which is typically around 90 minutes. On the acting front, the entire cast, especially the supporting actors, are really good. What really stands out for me is how seriously everyone plays their parts while still delivering impeccable comedic timing. Balancing horror and comedy is tough. Actors often lean more heavily on one side than the other, but in this film, they strike the perfect balance, which ensures that the audience is fully engaged during the serious moments while laughing out loud when it's time for the comedy. And finally, it's impossible to talk about this movie without talking about the special effects, which by now have reached legendary status, and that's because the man in charge of it, Rick Baker, is a legend in his own right. Even if you don't know him by name, you've definitely seen his work, like Men in Black, The Frighteners, and probably his most famous work, the ape prosthetics in Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. Over his career, he's been nominated for an Academy Award 11 times and won 7 times, with American Werewolf in London being his first nomination and his first win. And as I said earlier, all you have to do is look on the screen and see why. In the end, I highly recommend this movie. It's not just a great horror film, but a great film, period. And in my humble opinion, is a benchmark for both the horror and comedy genres. If you haven't seen it yet, I certainly hope that this review has convinced you to do so. And if you have seen it before, now's the perfect time to revisit it with Halloween just around the corner. Either way, trust me when I say you won't be disappointed.